Hello everyone, welcome to the Old Man and the Read. My name is Jerry. Today I'm going to talk about the books I read in the month of August. I read 8 books, I believe it is. Some of them quite exceptionally good, one not so good. So anyway, I'll go ahead and show you the books that I read. The first book I read in August was A Widow for 1 Year, written by John Irving, published in 1998. And this is a book about the life of a woman named Ruth Cole. It's written in 3 parts, each about a different time period in her life. The first takes place in the year 1958, and Ruth is 4 years old. But she had 2 older brothers that had died before she was born, and her house was full of pictures of the 2 boys. There were framed pictures in every room in the house. But her father was a well-known children's book writer, and he decided to hire a 16-year-old boy named Eddie to assist him in his work. Now, one day, Ruth walked into her parents' bedroom, and she saw in the bed her mother and the 16-year-old boy Eddie having sex together. Then the second section in the book begins 32 years later. This is in 1990, and Ruth is now a successful novelist. But she's going to a book event, and at that event she runs into Eddie, who is a writer now himself, 32 years after the occasion. And also in this section, she gets married to her longtime boyfriend, and she has a child. Then in the third section in the book, it is 1995, so 5 years later than the second section. But Ruth's husband had died the previous year, and so she was a widow for 1 year. But in this section, the third section, she meets another man and falls in love. And Eddie, who she had been in contact with off and on since their meeting 5 years previously, meets up with her mother 32 or almost 40 years, I guess it is, years after their sexual encounter. Let's see, the second book I read was A Woman of Means by Peter Taylor. This was published in 1950, and this follows a young boy named Quint. Quint's father has married a older, wealthy woman who has 2 grown daughters of her own. Now, Quint becomes very attached to his stepmother, and she becomes extremely attached to him. But then the marriage starts having some problems and begins to crumble, and this puts Quint in a really awkward position of where to place his loyalties. The next book I read was just a marvelous short story collection. This is The Stories of Erskine Caldwell, published in 1941. And I think it's a collection of just about all of the short stories he wrote in his career, but just incredibly good. I was going to, I went through to try to pick out the better stories, and I just came up with a huge list, but so I'm just going to mention a few of them. The first story is Country Full of Swedes. And this is really a humorous story. It's told by a man who's working and living on a farm that's owned by an elderly couple. Then one night he's awoken by shooting, gunshots, and yelling. And he gets up and finds that the older couple are in a bit of a panic. They said that the house next door that had been occupied by a group of Swedes, those people have now returned after being away for years. Another story is The Strawberry Season, and this is about a boy who's talking about strawberry picking with a girl named Fanny. Return to Lavinia. And this is about a man who had recently gotten married and just returned from his honeymoon. And he is talking to his housekeeper, a black housekeeper, named Lavinia. And she is the one he actually loves, but because of the racism of that time, he couldn't go any further. The next story is Horse Thief, and this is about a young man who sneaks out of his house and goes over to the neighbors, rides his horse over to the neighbors to secretly meet up with his girlfriend. Her father really doesn't like him and disapproves of him seeing her. So he has to sneak out at night. But when he goes home, it's extremely dark out, and he mistakenly takes the wrong horse home with him. And the next day, he's arrested for horse theft. And then the last story I'll mention is The Medicine Man, and this is about a traveling salesman who sells magical cure-all tonics, who tries to seduce a young girl. Next book I read is Origin, a Genetic History of the Americas, written by Jennifer Raff and published in 2022. And the book begins with a discussion of archaeology in America, and much of it is centered around the infighting that the established archaeologists are having with scientists who are discovering new sites that date earlier than what is conventionally thought of as the earliest that people came to America. And this is a battle that I've read about in several books on archaeology. It seems like that was a big issue at one time. But then she begins talking about DNA, and she explains the just great lengths that scientists go through to try to prevent any contamination to their samples, and she talks about the just extreme difficulty in obtaining samples altogether. But in the findings, one of the things is that it appears that there are two grandparent populations that Native Americans are descended from. They are East Asians and Northern Siberians. And it appears that those two groups were isolated for quite an extended period of time on a landmass basically the size of a continent between Alaska and Siberia, known as Beringia. But when they eventually started migrating south, they believe it was by boat. And the genetics show that these people must have split into three groups as they were doing so. The first group split in somewhere in British Columbia, present-day British Columbia. The second would have been somewhere in the present-day USA, and the third group continued south on into South America. And the spread, it was so rapid that they said there's no other way it could have been done except by boat. The next book I have is A Woman's Story by Annie Ernaux, published in 1988. And I've read I think this is like the fourth book by Ernaux that I've read, and they've all been somewhat semi-autobiographical, or autobiographical, not semi. And this is a story about her mother. The book begins with the death of her mother and the emotional impact that had on Ernaux, and she then talks about the preparations for the burial. And then the book goes into the life story of her mother, talking about the early years, then about her marriage to Ernaux's father, and also about the early death of her father at a fairly young age. She talked about the troubled relationship she had with her mother when she was growing up, and she continued the story of her mother up until the later years when she was starting to develop dementia, which was the lead cause of her eventual death. The next book I read was The Chateau by William Maxwell, published in 1961. And this takes place in 1948 France. France is still, or in 1948, and France is still recovering from the war. But an American couple have decided they want to vacation in France as tourists. They're Harold and Barbara, and but they discover that a lot of inconveniences. First, they've brought too much luggage along with them, and there are no porters to carry the luggage for them, so they have to do it themselves. They stay in a couple of small hotels for the first couple of nights, but then are going to go to their final destination, the Chateau Beaumesnil. But when they are ready to go, they find no car waiting for them, so they have to find their own transportation to the chateau. When they get there, they find that there is no hot water and a lack of toilets. They have difficulty communicating with the French hosts, and there's a lot of just cultural differences that cause problems. But they do their best to try to please their French hosts, and the French do their best to try to tolerate them, but it doesn't go real well at times. The book ends really strangely. It ends with a Q&A section where Maxwell answers imaginary questions from the writers, or from the readers. The next book I read is From Where Comes the Universe by Dennis Morris in 2015. And I've had an ongoing struggle for years. I read advanced theoretical books that I have a difficult time understanding. And this one I found in a used bookstore, and it said that it's for the non-mathematician, and it has non-mathematical explanations of the universe that are meant for the intelligent layperson. Now, I probably should have paid more attention to that intelligent part, because when I got the book home and started reading it, first it begins with talking about numbers and explains that what they are and what some of their properties are, and then it went through some very complicated explanations of some of the principles of mathematics, and it attempts to give simple explanations of those concepts, but the descriptions are just use very abstract and hard to grasp phrases and words, and so unless you actually knew what they were talking about, it was pretty much meaningless to me anyway. They used a lot of very advanced mathematical formulas in some of their explanations, and went through some very complicated, well, for advanced theories, some of the complicated advanced theories, explaining those, and they were short, concise definitions, and were almost incomprehensible, I thought. And I thought I would give an example of some of that. For example, this is where they're talking about fiber bundles, which consist of 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension. But the quote is, what they were talking about was the various types of fiber bundles. But the explanation for one of them is, another view is that a field is a fiber bundle with 4-dimensional space-time as an underlying space, and a different type of space fixed to that underlying space at every point of the underlying space. Now, that was an explanation. It was completely meaningless to me. So, maybe an actual intelligent layperson would understand it, but I didn't. And the final book I read in the month of August is The Box Garden by Carol Shields, published in 1977. Shields is just a really excellent writer. I've read quite a number of her books. But this is about Charlene. She's a 38-year-old divorced woman with a son. She's barely getting by on a very small salary she earns, a small child support that she receives from her ex-husband, and she gets occasional poems published, which she earns a small amount of money from. But she leaves her son to stay with a couple that are friends of hers while she goes to visit her mother. Her mother is planning on marrying a 72-year-old, very sickly former priest, and she wants to check that out. But while she's at her mother's, she learns that her son and the wife of the couple have gone missing, and that's where the story continues from there. But those are the books I read in August. Some of them just really excellent. One of them I had a very difficult time with, but I want to thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you on another. Bye.